You join us halfway through the day. We've seen all the teams now. Some of them have won, some of them have lost, but they're all still in the competition. I am Adrian Healingstat Archerlock, and joining me once again on the desk, we have Sloot, and of course we have the mighty man Rich sitting on the end of the table there. Now, we're going back to the Skyliners. We're going back to SKYLINE.D, who was probably, I think it's fair to say, the most dominant team we've seen out of China so far. They've been looking so strong, but they're going up against their sister squad in SKYLINE Top. Now, Sloot, you actually casted the first series of SKYLINE.D, and we were just so impressed by the squad. Do you think that SKYLINE Top even has a chance?
Maybe. Maybe. I think so. I mean, you know, we just kept saying well-oiled machine, well-oiled machine. But I mean, they were really good. But, you know, after their first kind of hiccups, SKYLINE Top as well came back with some pretty dominant matches and clean play after that, too. So it's going to be interesting to see. Yeah, and I do want to set the scenes just a little bit here. What is this? Where are we? This is, of course, the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. We're on our first broadcast, but we're going to be broadcasting over the next 4 weeks before our global finals at the end of June. So 4 weeks, 4 regions, top 8 teams per. We're here for China this weekend, then we're moving on to Asia Pacific, Europe, and North America. And Rich, I want to ask you about this because, of course, as a North American fan yourself, like if you're from one of the other regions here watching these Chinese squads, are you a little bit concerned? Because they were one of the regions that definitely underperformed last year, and they're looking on fire so far.
Yeah, I think it's safe to say that there were some pretty rocky roads for them last year as a region, but right now it is important to already start to think about things globally, and this next matchup definitely going to be one of those important matchups as well to be thinking globally because, look, SKYLINE.D is terrifying. The first thing that you said when you walked in, because I got to chill during that first series, you know, hang out in my sweatpants, you know, and in my lore t-shirt.
Has anything changed down there?
So then ultimately you came in, the first thing that you said is, look, SKYLINE.D could potentially be taking series off of any team in the world with how they did perform. I mean, they had great times. You don't even have to think about their competition. Obviously, seeding is going to come into effect. You expect them to have that upper hand in that first matchup. But Ted, they looked lights out, even competing against themselves.
But it wasn't even how well they kind of pulled everything and how, you know, strategically everything they had together, quite a lot of practice. It was just kind of, they had a unique strategy to them that a lot of the other teams didn't really have. You know, the way they would kind of stealth around some of the packs, get ready to AoE grip everything. They had a kind of what is becoming at least an unconventional, you know, Moth Souls pull with the double rogues stealthing around some of the packs. So it looks like they've really worked a lot on building up these what are kind of unique or a standout strats that we usually don't see too much of.
Yeah, and I do want to say as well, I mean, these teams are playing for much more than ever before, right? Like, we've had our first Mythic Dungeon Invitational last year. It's kind of like the trial, 3 weeks of grueling competition, went very well. You guys absolutely loved it. Now we're back with a more fleshed out, I want to say, version. $200,000 on the line now, but we are ready to get into the first game. We're going to be Black Rook Hold this time, so we are stepping it up to the 23 keys. Black Rook Hold up from More of Souls, definitely a little bit of a longer and potentially more challenging dungeon, and the affixes will be tyrannical rather than the fortified, and of course grievous and bursting. Casters, take it away.
All right. I mean, hey, look, we talk about it sounds like we actually are going to have a restart here, so I got to sit back down. I got a little bit too hype, a little bit too quick. I was so
excited for that. We were going to move in.
We fist bumped like 30 times,
we were just about to hug.
I was ready for it. I mean, we can do that now too.
Grievous and bursting is a weird combo. We were just talking about this. They just feed into each other, right? You get the bursting off the mobs, dips right into the grievous, and I mean, it's just like dot central for the healers to heal up. Not to mention there's a lot of pretty nasty trash in there, especially leading up to the second boss.
I do want to say too, obviously that is going to be important, actually thinking about how these keys are going to work, but the other thing that we do have to keep in mind is the compositions as well, and we already started to talk about that composition that SKYLINE does have, and look, it is one of SKYLINE.D has a composition that very easily could be able to just kind of sneak past things.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see. Of course, Black Rook Hold is an instance that I don't think we've actually seen at all just yet. It looks like he shrank a little bit.
Yeah, my chair just seems kind of...
It's fine, man.
This is like when he goes casting mode, he just like shrinks down a little bit. You can see that. We're just dipping down just a little bit.
Over there.
At least we got some bros. I'll just drop.
I'm never going to leave my man Ted hanging.
I mean, this is the thing. Like, SKYLINE is like way up there. Maybe we're just like trying to balance the equilibrium a little bit. But of course, I want to talk about Grievous and Bursting. Like, they're very important that the combinations are there. But Tyrannical as well, it's going to be something that perhaps for these two teams won't be so challenging, but when we look at teams like No Healer later on, this is going to be a gruesome combination.
Hey, look, they're weird. Like, let's be honest, they're weird. It's a weird thing. We almost can't think about them. Obviously, it's really exciting to talk about everything that they did just pull up, but we almost have to tuck them away, not really think about them right now. Now we need to start thinking about things like you have the more standard toolkits to actually deal with the challenges that these dungeons are going to throw at you. I'm excited to see what they can do because we're going to get to actually watch a more traditional team deal with all of those things, but this is the round that they have found themselves in. So when we actually do jump in and watch them play in our 6th match of the night, I believe it will be, so it will be the one right after this one, we will already have kind of an idea of what they can do.
And we are now ready to restart the map, ladies and gentlemen. Black Rook Hold is where we're hoping to be at the end of this one. Plus 23 keys, so bear in mind the scaling with the keys definitely makes this far more challenging, but we're ready for the battle of the Skyliners. SKYLINE.D versus SKYLINE Top.
So I think we're going to have a huge advantage right off the bat here, Rich. I mean, everybody always stealths past this first trash. Double rogue, easy, no problem. There's the first mass stealth. They're going to go right through. And SKYLINE Top is probably going to do something pretty similar here. Looks like they've invis potted. They all just go through safely. Now, that does put their pots on a 10-minute CD.
Exactly, and that could be a huge amount of damage that is actually going to be lost here now. One of the really nice things that we are going to see, this is one of the very easy compositions, one that SKYLINE.D has here, that they are going to be able, the healer's just going to be able to toss out a root. That's one of the nice things about the Druid here, can just toss out a root on one of the ads that is going to come out. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, what do they really need to worry about on Amalgam of Souls?
Yeah, so, you know, a few abilities to watch out for here. Up to 50%, there's a huge frontal cleave on the tank and a 180-degree cone, which leaves a nasty debuff. Usually just dodge it, and of course, there are some compounding images, as we can see on both sides, actually, right now, that if you step in that void zone from those images, you will get feared. Then, of course, that scythe that shoots out and will kind of punt anyone out of the way, so you just kind of have to be careful. But, of course, Rich, the most important is at 50% when the boss will go to the middle of the room and spawn those spirits on the side of the room.
And those spirits, we all know you want to be able to get them down as quick as possible. Otherwise, it could be lethal, increasing the amount of damage that the Amalgam of Souls will be able to toss out. And that was one of the reasons that I actually did bring up the Druid. They could potentially just root that ad out, and the boss will actually kind of chill there, doing absolutely nothing for a little bit longer. There is some potential to get something like that going on the other side of SKYLINE Top, but it's going to be a little bit more difficult to actually execute.
Right, sure. In fact, if they do root it, the boss will only force that AoE explosion at 15% HP, so that it can kind of buy a lot of time to not have to deal with the rest of the mechanics once the boss re-enters for his phase. So we can see SKYLINE.D, of course, now entering that second phase, and SKYLINE Top really not very far behind.
And there's that root right there, and we can see how long maybe they actually do choose to hold that root at this moment, but they got to get a lot of work done on these ads. The grip does come in. There's the stun to follow it up. A massive death from above going to be able to come in from both of these rogues. They're going to be able to bring them down without a problem, and this is what we were talking about. Druid going to be able to keep that ad out there, and now the Amalgam of Souls kind of looks like an idiot, doesn't he? He's just standing there holding that. You're not doing anything, buddy. At 15%, though, he will actually unleash the fury.
Right, Jira, yeah, exactly. So none of the souls absorbed into the boss, because if any do, they substantially increase the damage of that AoE. So it should be okay till 15%. I mean, neither team should really have any problem with this boss at the end of the day. But, you know, it is worth noting, SKYLINE.D is just really pulling ahead in terms of damage here. I mean, there's a 15% differential between the two teams right now. Those two rogues just pumping out so much, along with the Demon Hunter, when you compare it to the Warrior and the Warlock, which are trailing behind the Demon Hunter on SKYLINE Top.
And there's that damage coming through at this moment, but they're able to shrug that off without a problem. It is going to be on SKYLINE Top to kind of creep back into this, get a little bit of damage done. But one of the things that we definitely do know about this dungeon, some of the bosses aren't quite as scary. This boss in particular, not that scary, but the next few trash pulls are kind of hideous.
There's a lot of stuff coming up, a lot of nasty stuff. Now, coming up the stairs in a moment, we'll see. We'll have a bit of RP
Talk
here.
to me like that.
Oh, we'll talk about this later. Now, coming up the stairs here, of course, we do have those spiders up the twirling staircase, which is usually a nightmare for healers, especially because the tank likes to do things where you pull a bunch of the spiders, run around the top, you LOS the healer, and then you get a bunch of dots and die, and then you yell at the healer because it's always their fault.
It's always their fault.
Of course, absolutely. Yeah. So they have to watch out for that. And then after that, we just have so much trash that needs constant attention in terms of interrupts because of just AoE damage on the group, random AoE damage from the arrows. You have the frontal from the commanders buffing everybody with Rallying Cry, so just a lot of hard CC needed on the upcoming trash.
This is one of those dungeons where a lot of the times as a ranged DPS, for example, it's just like, okay, max range all of the time. That's not going to be a luxury that SKYLINE.D has at all. All these guys going to have to be up close and personal. Do you feel like this is one of those dungeons where having such a melee heavy build is where maybe a little bit of punishment can actually come in for for the squad.
I mean, yes and no. The thing is, they have the same comp with bursting again as they did on MOS. So they have this kind of a lot of heavy pre-immunes that they could do with that big spider pull right there. You know, let's say if the rogue's pre-cloaked, they're no problem. Of course, they have to deal with this big spider coming up, and then coming off the side, we're going to see one of those commanders padding along with the mob for the knife dance that they will have to interrupt because it's just a ton of damage on the raid, unless they LOS it. But with all the melee, they just lose so much damage if they LOS.
Hey, look, this pull as well, going silky smooth for them right now, gliding on through that one now, going to be able to pull some additional trash alongside it. They're able to actually pull that champion right up against the spider as the spider does fall. Scouts as well. There's the spinner finally going down here, so that's going to work with that bursting very nice. You see the bursting already falls off. It's almost like it doesn't even happen at all, and the healer able to stay on the front foot and able to put out big damage here.
Yeah, as long as they keep above that 90%, the Grievous should be no problem for them either. Here comes that knife dance we were talking about earlier. Well done to Grip. Just does a ton of damage on the group if it's allowed to channel through. In the meantime, though, SKYLINE top really not too far behind. They're just up there, too. They still have that big spider spawned up that they still haven't killed. So SKYLINE.D just a bit ahead. It's about the same percentage that they pulled ahead of on the boss. Now, this next room, because they skipped so much of that trash leading up to the first boss, they're pretty much going to have to clear the rest of this dungeon out, more or less.
This is one of the pulls that already things will start to get scary. Right now, both these teams neck and neck. We expect them to be very well prepared on this dungeon, but they're going for that massive.
All right. So huge pull here. Lots of commanders that could buff. Lots of, I mean, their strat here is clearly just make sure you interrupt everything, chain CC it until it's dead, and they're probably gonna have to kite to LOS some of this because, I mean, there's just a lot of, like, that knife dance needs to be interrupted. No one's interrupting it, but, you know, they're just healing. There we go. There's the stun.
Yeah, very
midway
nice stun.
through. So yeah, they're just planning to kill everything before they get killed here. But I mean, the thing is, if those champions get one of their rallying cries off, that's 50% HP buff on top of their current HP, which will make it take so long to kill.
We could see some cheeky stuff come out, though, on the other side as well. It doesn't look like they're going to be going for quite as massive as the pull. Warlock can do some weird things based off the legendary usage, wearing that ring if possible. And because as you can see here, even with that massive amount of investment that was put in, all of these stuns that have been used, you know, just CC it to hell. Still, a lot of kiting really does need to happen. They're going to try to use this wall to their advantage as well. Bursting, going to be stacking up here, and you can see that they're not necessarily able to reset it. This is going to be a big amount of damage that's coming in right now, and ultimately they are able to get by that without a problem. What did they do there, Ted?
Just good communication, honestly. They probably said, just chill for a second. We got 2 seconds left until the rest of this bursting runs out. We're falling behind with Grievous right now. Everything's caught up. They're good to go. And they did something similar in MOS too. Just really good communication. LOSing here as Commander Shamalama Ding Dong comes down, rounds the corner, has 2 scouts, 2 archers with them. So a lot of AoE damage that's going to need to be dealt with. And of course, that frontal from the commander that will do that buff on the group for the HP. In the meantime, SKYLINE top taking a much more, you know, casual, slow approach to this hallway.
His name's not Shalamana Ding Dong.
I know. I know.
I double checked.
I know that.
I didn't. I do now.
The more you know. So as they're dealing with this last pack, now the door to the second boss will not open until this pack is dead. I mean, this is a huge time gain for SKYLINE.D here over SKYLINE top. SKYLINE top doing the more traditional pulls with just how dangerous this trash is. 1 pack at a time, dealing with the CAD, dealing with commanders. You know, they still have the penultimate pull up until commander comes down. I mean, SKYLINE.D's pulling way ahead here.
They definitely are, and that big risk is going to have a big reward as well, and they're starting to get very close, just a few pulls away from actually getting up to that next boss number 2. And this is where the difficulty kind of starts to kick up in the boss department as well. I think that second boss is one of the more scary bosses that we do really see here, and obviously the 4th boss as well can be quite frightening at times, and that says a lot in a dungeon that is as spooky as this one.
Especially on the 23 Tyrannical. I mean, there's going to be a lot of damage coming in, especially the Fell Rush on the second boss. So they have 1 more pack to go here with 1 commander and 2 archers in just a moment. Should be no problem for SKYLINE.D in just a moment. But I mean, SKYLINE top, you know, nothing's going wrong for them, but they're just moving way slower. I mean, they didn't pull the whole hall successfully. They're doing 1 pack at a time, so there's just so many seconds lost here. SKYLINE.D moving up, as I said, to that champion double archer pack. No problem, stunning it down. They're really cleaving down that archer much faster. They don't want to deal with some of that residual damage on the group to allow the healer to maybe have a bit of a breather.
And also, you just look at the composition of SKYLINE.D. It's got all the pieces, right? It's able to do those massive pulls, and it's also able to skip by things that aren't actually efficient to deal with. They got a lot in their favor here, SKYLINE.D. The question is, it's one of those scenarios that you find, you assume that they're going to try to continue to go about things in this fashion. This seems to be their play style. If they ever do slip up from maybe maybe being a little bit too greedy. That is going to be SKYLINE Top's way to try to find their way back on top, because they're playing things very calmly. They are playing things very cleanly. We don't necessarily expect them to make a mistake, but, well, being safe, be too dangerous.
Maybe. So Ilisana Ravencrest here, a few things we have to watch out for. There's that Vengeful Shear on the tank. You have to make sure active mitigation's up, otherwise it'll take a debuff for 100% damage taken. Of course, that Brutal Glaive, which will bounce between members and add a dot onto the raid. Now, the most dangerous here is this Fel Rush. It will target 3 players, and she will bounce between them, getting the DH so low there. Just does a ton of damage. Luckily, no fatalities there. And eventually, she will kind of fly up onto the ledge and summon 2 mobs, one of the Arcanists and one of the Commanders that will cast that Bone-Breaking Strike in front. During that time, she's going to constantly fixate one of the ranged players, in this case, obviously, the Resto Druid, who will have to constantly run around in circles, making sure that they're dropping the Fel Beam in, and kind of, dealing with their real estate well here in the meantime.
Definitely one person who you do not want to have their sights fixed on you, but luckily for the Resto Druid, relatively mobile and also can handle damage as well, just being in bear form. So because the healing isn't so heavy during that particular phase, staying in bear form is also going to mean big damage for the Resto Druid as well. You can kind of switch into legendaries depending on the circumstance and get out a lot of damage with your Moonfires here. Most likely, though, as you are pulling this boss, probably not going to be with those legendaries, but it's just something to think about, and also going to have Frenzied Regeneration as an option. So you got to think about how flexible really it is to be a Resto Druid. We expect that to be one of the healers we see quite a lot of, but in favor of SKYLINE Top, probably the most popular healer in Mythic Plus is going to be what they're bringing.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. So Ilisana, of course, coming down, the Resto Druid dealing well. She does usually have looks that could kill, but properly layered in the back of the room. Look at all this beautiful space in front that they have to run around with now and spread out properly for this Fel Rush. There it is, pre-bear forming, just to make sure there's no extra damage, getting right out, healing those Brutal Glaives. Now, the Vanguard is still up from earlier with that Bone-Breaking Strike, but there's really no danger there. Just make sure you don't get hit by that frontal. Otherwise, the tank could easily handle that damage. Of course, on the side, we see SKYLINE Top already entering their transition phase as well. So they've fallen a bit further behind, but nothing too bad. They also do have that 1 death. With how close these 2 teams are right now, that 5 seconds could be a big deal at the end, Rich.
Yeah, and as you can see, SKYLINE Top kind of being that team that doesn't want to rush into anything, but they might get rushed in this one.
Especially Fel Rushed, if I'm going in the direction that you're going here. Now,
that was
dripping quite low. We do have a
pun.
death come here from the Vengeance Demon Hunter. So much damage coming in. They're probably not going to opt to res with the 13% remaining on the boss. Probably don't. Actually, they did. Okay, they do end up resing. They still have that 1 battle res left for later. I don't know. That was close.
So that's one of those scenarios where you almost, this is a checkpoint, of course. So if you don't go for the res, it's an easy just hit release. You're right back with the squad. But they opt to get that little extra bit of damage. And once again, we talk about greed. This could be a greedy play to invest that little bit of extra time onto the boss. I mean, look at how far ahead they are. And that comes from that massive pull that they actually did do. Now they're going to have that battle res used. And we haven't talked about it so much, but one of the biggest changes as we actually do get here, I mean, there are a slew of changes. So to call it one of the biggest might be a little bit... might be overlooking some things, but Battle Res change is definitely going to have its impact on this tournament. And for anyone who doesn't actually know how that Battle Res change has come into effect, what do they need to be looking at?
I mean, they just follow raid-style Battle Reses now. We typically saw in the last MDI, you'd bring, a rogue, a bunch of druids, some DKs, warlocks, and you just kind of over battle res the rest of the team. But Rich, we could talk about that later. There's a huge pull coming here out of SKYLINE.D again. Really not too surprised to see this from them anymore. Those Blade Lords are super, super dangerous for the tank. If they get one of their Blade Flurries off, they can decimate the tank, the Brutal Assaults, excuse me. Those need to be interrupted after the cast is finished during the channel, else they will recast it immediately. So they do well to interrupt them there, keeping them away from the tank as they kite away, and they just decimate them. Everything just melts off the board, no problem.
I mean, hey, look, that isn't even an easy one to kite there. As you can see, it gets quite spicy at times, and ultimately we are going to see the healer fall. And one of the things to note as we kind of see this team drop, they kind of want to stay in the fight here. They already made that investment. They save the time that they actually get from those deaths. They get a few deaths coming in here. That's going to be 5 seconds for each of those deaths, but it's not too big of a deal because that checkpoint that we already mentioned, they can run right back in. Already that mob being efficiently kited. You can see the tank get back into the fight here, and now they should be good to go. But this could be a little bit of a fumble that does allow Top to sneak back into this.
Unfortunately, the Blood DK does pop Perg, but he did a really nice play there where he gripped one of the low adds towards him in order to get that Death Strike off and heal him before he procced that Perg too early. Now, rushing back up the next stair of boulders, they'll be caught between a rock and a hard place if they get hit by one of these things. But moving up, they will come over to that gauntlet with those 6 Fellow Lords and all those bats that do get fixated on players.
Hey, look, they do a smashing job, though, dealing with these here. And we actually see the Druid doing my strategy. It's called waiting for the other people to do it for you, so you don't have to think about any of the rocks. And ultimately, it runs up a little bit too soon. Has to dodge 3 rocks there, but it's a lot better than having to do the whole gauntlet. But speaking of gauntlets, like you said, time to take a look at the bats.
Now, interesting what they're doing here. They're using mass stealth to go up behind the tank. What happens is that these Fel Lords will actually cast sick bats, which will cause all of the bats to fixate one player. And it's really easy for those bats to just turn around and one-shot somebody immediately. So by doing that, they kind of stay hidden under the radar until the tank gets everything in position. They pull everything together. Now, there are 6 Dominators they need to deal with. So they kind of decided to stop halfway, deal with those 3 first, get them low enough, with the first 4 rather, get them low enough, and now they'll pull the remaining 2 into the 3rd boss's room.
And also, with that, they're able to give the bats a dose of their own medicine, and they are going to be put to the grave, and that's going to put them right up onto our next boss, going to be Smash Spite. Now, what do they need to worry about here?
So, excuse me, they actually did end up pulling all 6 of the Dominators there. They just didn't take it into the boss's room. They actually kept it in the lobby, which is why we don't see them here. There's a few lingering bats here, but I mean, they just went bat crazy on that pack and killed everything. Now, on this boss specifically, he's just a heavy hitter on the tank. He builds up his energy bar based on successful damaging melees on the tank and their size. If he reaches 100, he will hit that haymaker and absolutely crush the tank. Now you're looking scared here.
I mean, you talk about going batty there. You're going to see just how much damage that's going to allow these rogues to get out to start things off. And they come in. You talk about Smash Might being a heavy hitter. It is going to be this rogue that really grabs our attention here. But the mechanics starting to come in, and they are starting to feel the pain for sure. Look at Grievous.
Yeah, Grievous is, I mean, he's falling just a bit behind on the rogues. We do have that cheat death proc on the 2nd rogue there already. Starts catching up on the healing. Everybody should be dipped out of Grievous in just a moment. That last rogue just can't get over the hump. Neither can the healer themselves. Now, Smash Smite will also, nails the rogue with the ability we're just going to talk about. So he does cast kind of a gaze on one of the targets that needs to be intercepted by somebody, and the rogue just kind of ate it to the face there. It didn't turn out so well. In the meantime, as long as you layer these bat lines on the side and deal with your real estate well, that's fine. But they don't have a battle res for this.
Exactly. That was exactly. You read my mind. Absolutely. This is the problem here. They use that battle res on the last boss when that boss only had, what, 9% health left, 11% health, 11%. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it doesn't get that much done. Very greedy to try to squeeze out every bit of damage that they could. But now you see Smash Spite with 48%, and now we got a team hitting with every single one of their DPS. This could be where we see Skyline Top punish the greed.
Skyline Top is on their way to the top, like we talked about later. I mean, look at this. They're ahead 3 deaths. That's already a 15-second differential. They're getting to do this boss with all 5 members of the party, and they're only, what, 20-30% behind SKYLINE.D at the moment. I mean, favor is actually on for Skyline Top right now. It's all going to come down to how they're going to pull the remaining Lancers and Swordsmen leading up to the last boss.
And you wonder if these teams might, how well they probably know each other's strategies. Obviously, they've kind of gotten to see each other's VOD from the last match. They definitely know each other, right? They are both going to kind of be these sister teams. They're from the same region.
They had lunch together.
They most likely did, you know, and now you can see it is on Sky. I thought SKYLINE.D was going to be very easily able to serve up a dose of vitamin D, but now it looks like it is going to be Skyline Top that does prevail, because look at how much they are catching up. We definitely got a race on our hands here, Ted.
Yeah, Skyline's kind of running a bit out of space here is the problem. I mean, both teams are, if you're looking at their relative percentages, but, you know, Skyline Top's going to kill this boss faster, obviously, than SKYLINE.D without that 1 DPS, but it's kind of looking a bit scary here. I mean, Smash Spite does do that AoE knockback, which is a fair bit of damage, especially on a tyrannical setting, and if you get knocked into one of these puddles on the ground, I mean, it just might be enough to tip over, or at least make your life really hard with that Grievous ticking.
You could very easily drown in these puddles here. That is something to think of, because they don't have that much to really deal with getting knocked into these puddles, and already you can see that rogue going to be getting hit pretty hard here at this moment. Still 13%.
And it's looking like that Druid man is quite low right now. It should have enough to sustain the rest of the fight. 10% now. And you know, we're talking about a high 20s, 30% differential between the two teams now. It's starting to close that gap in favor of Skyline Top, of course. Now, they do have a Warlock death there. They immediately use that battle res, and they are entering that execute stage now, where they have that Arms Warrior and the Warlock for that. That will help a lot. But, you know, that kind of hurt Top a bit. They were hoping to kind of catch up as much as they could. So extra death, 5 seconds on top of that, not going to be good.
To be honest, it actually does look like the Warlock's doing a substantial amount of damage. Warlock could very easily not even be running Execute here. You kind of hope that your Warlock is in this scenario because this is really where they need to catch up. But keep in mind, even though Smash Spite hasn't fallen yet, there is going to be a 10-second delay essentially on SKYLINE.D. They got those extra 2 deaths. Each of those going to dock to 5 seconds. What?
Did the boss despawn? I didn't even see. I thought they killed it. I was just about to comment on why was the healer healing the rogue when this is a checkpoint, but the boss despawn somehow, so that is going to be a huge problem for SKYLINE.D. We'll have to keep an eye on that. In the meantime, SKYLINE
feeling all of Smash Spite's spite there as they deal with him for a second time, and now we expect them to get it down much quicker this time around. Now they are going to have all 4 of their DPS, but SKYLINE top going to be moving to the top of this building where they will find their final adversary.
Yeah, so they'll have to deal with these swordsmen and of course the lancers as well. We have to watch out for those raven dives. Anything caught in that swirly is going to stun everything by 5 seconds with no DR. And of course, those swordsmen have the coup de grace, which is a huge nuke on the tank. So it's a pretty sizable pull here. A lot of damage coming in on the tanks, and people have to kind of keep moving their feet, make sure that they don't get stunned here in the first place. But it looks like they're handling it well, and they pulled the entire hall. So after this, they have nothing but Dentalian.
That first coup de grace is going to be coming in here as well. And as you can see, SKYLINE top going to let out a big old hoorah. They're able to get past that mechanic with no problem, not even breaking a sweat here. They only got 5% left needed on the trash, and they have definitely pulled ahead. It looks like that sun is setting on the skyline of SKYLINE.D. Now their sister team going to be on the last boss, but they are, did they have, oh, okay, so they do have that pet right now. So you see this very often actually come in with that Death Knight. They're able to enslave the undead.
Yes, it was, because you were looking at 99% for the trash. That's what we're looking at.
Exactly.
But they will be able to kind of pick that off at the very end of the dungeon, using it to their advantage for this boss. Now, this boss, of course, in 2 phases. We have this humanoid phase here at the start, where you have to dodge this beam across the room. He will dodge. He will also hurl a glaive that will remain there for the rest of the phase at one of the targets and punt anyone that comes nearby. And finally, he will hew the tank with a bleed at some point as well.
I'm hearing in my ear that we are moving back to a replay. Of course, we did see the boss resetting their Smash Spider. It's a little bit unfair. We could do some little shenanigans where we reduce the time, but I think the administrators have called for a replay with that one, so a little bit unfortunate. But, I mean, honestly, SKYLINE.D were slightly ahead in that one, so I think they would have felt hard done if they were to lose that.
Yeah, I mean, that was a little weird. I wasn't exactly sure. We were trying to figure out exactly what happened there. I think the remake totally does make sense. Happy to be doing it. Both of these teams, though, they're looking pretty darn good. I'm impressed by both of these squads, and we can also see that no matter how many times we play this map, I really do think it will be a close race.
I'm really happy, actually. Like, these teams really are, like, showing how close they can be. I was expecting SKYLINE.D, based on their first round performance, to have a really, really good one, but they had a couple of deaths, a couple of hiccups in that last round salute, and, I mean, they were able to still stay ahead, but it was close.
I mean, the lead that SKYLINE.D got from the huge trash pull for the second boss and then the huge hallway pull too, I mean, they just closed that gap big time. SKYLINE top did. I mean, they caught up, you know, obviously they had the kind of rogue death where they couldn't battle res, which was kind of a misplay with using that battle res on the second boss, but it was neck and neck before we had that kind of unfortunate scenario.
But that's the thing, right? I mean, when you think about the big picture, greed comes to mind, and it's important. I think that is always the thing. You need to take those risks if you ever do want to come out on top. But that battle res really does show the potential for things to go awry for SKYLINE.D, because if that battle res didn't come in, it would have been smooth sailing. They would have been able to just get up that third DPS, and they would have been able to smash Spite much harder. And that's kind of the question moving forward. Do we see any of these teams maybe tweak their strategy a little bit, or is it going to be a very aggressive play style coming out from D, and top going for the much safer plays?
I mean, I really liked watching the two teams battle it out because they were quite similar in the ways they did. It was just these little things, and maybe if they do watch the broadcast, they can pick up SKYLINE top, some of the stuff that SKYLINE.D did play in that one. But one point I really did want to hem in on is, in the first round, we saw SKYLINE.D running the double sub. It's something we've been expecting, those subtlety rogues, but actually here they ran one sub and one assassination. Why do you think that was? Is it the tyrannical affix they're playing around?
So there are a few different reasons to actually do this. I mean, you just get more flexibility there, and they're able to deal damage in different ways. One of the really big reasons that we do see subtlety pop up quite a bit, we always like to talk about, and that is going to be the way that you can actually use that Shuriken Storm to generate more combo points, to be getting more targeted damage, but onto a boss. But assassination, it is no stranger to damage at all. You're able to get quite a bit of damage done.
Yeah, and the other thing I do really want to talk about, because going into the game, we talked about Grievous and Bursting being such a difficult combination for these healers, and I really feel like it was the Restoration Druid on SKYLINE.D who was struggling to clear those stacks, and many points in that game.
Yeah, there were a lot of problems. I mean, we commented on it a lot during that match. They were sitting at 5 stacks frequently after the big pull, before the second boss, a third boss too when they first pull Smash Spite. He was struggling a lot. I don't know, and you can't say it was because he was too offensive. He was not really showing up on the damage meter. It was difficult to heal those rogues up, and it was at the cost of healing himself too, and he was just constantly falling behind, something that the Paladin didn't really struggle with, at least with their type of pull. But that's what happens. You risk these bigger pulls, you're going to have a huge amount of bursting stacks.
Yeah, and I am hearing in my ear that we're just getting the teams ready for, of course, the replayed match. Just to clarify, we will be going back to 0-0. It's Blackroot Cold plus 23. Same composition, same specializations locked in from these teams. They won't be able to change anything aside from perhaps cleaning up, tweaking those little mistakes that we saw in the first round, which honestly, I mean, based on what was a pretty clean pool for both of the sides, is going to be very exciting to see. But there's so much on the line here, Rich. This is really the Battle of the Skylines. There's a lot of pride. If you think of these as like the Chinese version of Method, like imagine when two methods collide, both in PvP or PvE. There's just so much hype for these teams.
I mean, we're also getting very close to the first elimination matches of the day. We're progressed quite far in this tournament, and that really is something that is unique to the format of MDI. You basically have a mini bracket every single weekend, and only 2 teams can come out on top. Only 2 teams can actually make it to those global finals, and we're already starting to get to the point that we're going to start actually sending teams home. Another thing that I wanted to note, Adrian, as well, we kind of talk about how SKYLINE.D just looked like they were dunking on their competition earlier. This is a much more difficult matchup for them, not only because we're seeing 2 of these Skyline squads, but because that first matchup, seeding really does come into play. First, 8th. Now it's going to be much closer as we progress in this tournament, and that actually means that we're going to see a lot of matches that are closer in seeding throughout the rest of the tournament as well.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really cool things as well, is that we deliberately hide who's going to battle against who in the global finals, because we don't want any of that strategic stuff where it's like, hey, I'd rather meet a European team. Well, I don't think anyone would say that right now, but rather meet an American team, rather meet a team from Asia. There's so many like different strategies you can have, but we just keep it clean. We keep it all about the China weekend. These teams want to prove they're the best out of their region, and it's one thing that's been very interesting to see, but it looks like we will be heading to a quick break after that first series so that we can figure out what these teams have. With that increased stake, we need to make sure these guys do have the time to make sure they're fine, and we will go into this next game after a short break. back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. We're in our upper brackets. These teams have already won. It's SKYLINE.D versus SKYLINE.Top. And we are ready to get back into the game. So the teams will be loading up into Black Rook Hold, the +23, the Tyrannical Grievous bursting that we saw causing both the teams trouble, but they were expertly handling it thus far. Let's see how they can do on attempt 2. The replayed map, of course, we are tied 0-0 in this series.
Yeah, you know, Ted, if we do replay this again, we may be Black Rook old before we get out of this one.
Right, you are, Rich. It's been a while since we've seen this dungeon, indeed. But you know what's going to be interesting in this opportunity to recast the exact same match with these teams is to see if they can capitalize on their mistakes or if they decide that something didn't work for them and they're going to pull differently. Nonetheless, we obviously see pretty standard stuff from both teams here right away. We see the skips of the trash, the rogue shrouds coming up from D, and of course for top, they do use that invis pod.
The other thing to note with SKYLINE.D is one little mistake almost defined their entire run. That battle res that actually did come in was such a huge factor. The question is, if they don't mess up on Raven Crest, maybe it's just smooth sailing past Smash Might. We'll see in just a little bit, but now, once again, need to pay attention to Amalgam of Souls. We already did explain the mechanics, but if you're just trickling in here, one of the interesting things that we got to see them do, they fully use that Restoration Druid. Restoration Druid, when we get to that 50% mark, most likely again is going to just throw an ad inside of the roots, and that means that they won't have to deal with that massive burst of damage that this boss puts out until 15%.
Right, you are, and I mean, that Druid is pumping out damage big time.
Oh, yeah.
Between the Druid and the tank, they're getting a nice bunch of extra damage, and I mean, they're only slightly ahead right now of top, of which, of course, is on the right-hand side of the screen. But like you said, Rich, once we hit that 50% mark, boss will go to the middle, spawn the 8 spirits around the room. We'll see that root come up again from the Resto Druid on SKYLINE.D, allowing the boss to kind of stay in this transitionary phase up until 15%, after which the AoE will happen, and they should be able to pretty easily finish it off. Now, I would like to see SKYLINE.Top, as probably we'll see, you know, capitalizing on that execute damage. That's really where they kind of make up some of the boss time, because they are slowly falling behind SKYLINE.D on the general damage right now.
Yeah, one of the things to note too, I mean, last MDI, Arms Warriors were everywhere. This time, we don't really expect to see nearly as many. Definitely different classes expected to be represented, but this is kind of the all-star on their team, YD. He one of the best warriors in the world, and we have seen consistent damage coming out of YD so far. Now, both of these teams going to be in this phase of Amalgam of Souls where those ads do spawn, and once again, a nice cheeky little root going to come out here from that Druid.
We have the AoE grip, of course, on the spirits from both of them. And yeah, you're right. I mean, YD just getting ready to prime that execute damage, of course, brother of XD, as we do know from live servers. 27%, still dropping faster. I mean, they're just opening the gap D versus top here. They're going to hit that 50% mark. We're just going to have to see how much of the gap they can close once they hit that execute for SKYLINE.Top right now. But, you know, what we really need to talk about, Rich, because we did just see these teams play, is how they're going to capitalize. And do you think, for instance, SKYLINE.Top is going to change their pull pattern going upstairs to try and match the aggressive pull that SKYLINE.D did?
I think that SKYLINE.Top can play their own game. There is no reason, just because a replay comes in, to try to switch your strategy, because if you haven't practiced doing those massive pulls, you're setting yourself up for failure. Let SKYLINE.D play their game. Hope that they make a mistake like they did last time, because look, they did. SKYLINE.D pulled off a fantastic pull, but they had a terrible battle res. You gotta call them as you see them. They did one thing very well, they did one thing very bad. SKYLINE.Top just consistently did everything okay, and that would have been good enough. Obviously, we saw that little bit of a fluky happenstance go down, and that brings us to this replay, but that is going to be very important history as we go into Black Rook Hold. This is, of course, going to be all tied up right now. 0-0, best of 3 series in that winner's portion of the bracket.
So we do have about a 20-second differential between the boss deaths on either, of course. SKYLINE.Top still waiting for their RP to go upstairs now. SKYLINE.D approaching that kind of stairwell with all the spiders leading up to the dangerous trash prior to the Ravencrest second boss. Just like we saw before, they're going to pull all the spiders together. They're going to AoE all the smallies down, and then they're going to make their way upstairs and pull the big spider after that, making sure to dispel that tank as well, because of that heavy dot that these spiders do apply on their melee. On top of the Grievous could be quite a lot. But yeah, so they do get a late dispel. About 3/4 of that dot ticked on the DK, but no harm done in the end. Nothing too bad. They do pull the spinner, and then they're going to take it up to that commander pad along with the rogue.
You can just see it creepy crawling, getting up these steps right now, but this is kind of what we saw before, already wanting to pull very big. Now, this is where Pandora's box could just be kicked open by them. After they actually do clean up this pool, this is where we saw them go bananas last time around. The question is, do they go bananas again? Honestly, I think SKYLINE.D should. It seems to be something that they had relatively well rehearsed, and this is where they picked up almost all of their time, as they actually did get into this, I guess it's a grand foyer. I am definitely not a master of architecture, but I believe I would consider this the grand foyer of Black Rookhold.
Foyer.
Foyer,
yes. Comes before 5-yay. But moving upstairs now, so they're dealing with this 3-pack here. Now, it's after this that they prime themselves to get ready with this massive pull coming up. Pulling all 3 packs before, of course, the Forced Commander Shamalama Ding Dong pack. SKYLINE top, as you said, not far behind. In fact, they're both working on the same pack. At this point, you know, we're splitting hairs here. Of course, I wouldn't know that, but we're splitting hairs here. That SKYLINE top was actually a bit further behind at this point on the previous map, so a bit cleaner of a run from them. Here, of course, does come the Sky Step from SKYLINE.D, much like the previous dungeon, pulling everything together. We're going to see that huge grip. We're going to see the CC pop up on all of the AoE, you know, on the scouts, on everything, making sure that there's not too much raid damage. And we just saw, of course, the Blood DK go off screen to start kiting these mobs.
And once again, you talk about Shyamalan here, and this is where the twist really could come in. And now they're going to try to execute that pull once again. And I do want to note one thing, guys, if you're watching at home, you probably did notice there's a little bit of a discrepancy on the timer in the bottom portion of your screen. You don't got to worry. We got everything under control here. Just because you can't necessarily see the correct time does not mean our admins can't. They have everything figured out. So, boom, gone. Fix that one. Now jumping back into the gameplay that we see here, Ted.
You know, we actually did see a bigger pull, if I'm not mistaken, from top this time compared to last time. I know last time they took 2 or 3 pulls here. It does seem like they combined several packs together this time. They're doing, you know, what you said they wouldn't, which is kind of a ballsier pull here, but it's working out for them. We are going to have the kiting in. Now, the difference between the 2 teams is they opted to actually enslave the cat with the Blood DK on SKYLINE top side and kind of opt to not have that huge cleave damage for the cat jumping around, because that would be a catastrophe, right? Now, the problem is that cat later you're going to have to unleash at some point and kill for the percentage, something that SKYLINE.D has already dealt with.
It could still be a little bit whiskery.
That's absolutely very true.
Nonetheless, that one didn't work.
We'll work on it. Nonetheless, of course, Shemda-san, which is his actual name, has now come down. The last pack that will open the door on the way to Ravencrest, the second boss, Ilisana. They did the same strat here, of course. They LOS around the corner, quite far away, might add. I'm not really sure why they're not opting to kind of kill this pack closer where they spawn, which is one of those pillars there. Now, the problem, of course, with spawning them at the pillars is that they kind of come around both sides of the pillar, but it's not really a huge deal. Nonetheless, they're dealing with that last pack right now. Meanwhile, of course, we still do have SKYLINE top kiting some of that big pull, and of course, we do see the banish on that elemental too.
That banish going to be coming out there, making things a little bit easier for the squad to deal with it, but it also does slow down the pull just a little bit. But it allows them to kind of spread out bursting just a little bit here now, and it does jump back in. They can kind of go about their merry AoE way, but you can tell they're not as rehearsed on this very big pull as we did see the squad of D doing an impressive job as, and now already they're kind of dealing with this mob before they get back up to Ravencrest. But keep in mind, Ravencrest was also where things went wrong last time.
You're right, but I would argue that SKYLINE top is actually much closer to D than they were in the previous match.
I agree. I agree with you there.
I mean, they're just cleaning up their Shyamalan pack right now, and then they're going to be able to go onto the pack that D is on the screen right now for us with that champion and double archer pack. Same strategy as last time, of course, killing one of the archers quickly to stop some of that residual damage for the random shots around it. Bit of a dip on one of the rogues there, no problem. Heals it right back up, making sure those Grievous stacks don't go up too much. And in just a moment after finishing this off, they will run around to the side and be prepared to pull Ilisana, which, Rich, as you said, is kind of where things went wrong. And you know what? Things went wrong very late into the fight. They executed very well up to that point.
For sure. We already talked about this boss quite a bit. We talked about the mechanics, but keep in mind it is going to be on their Resto Druid to kind of move about, dodge all of the I-beam damage and all of that's going to be coming out here. Resto Druid obviously very good at doing that, but the rush mechanic going to be dealt with by the rest of the party. And you can see just moving up in there, going to make that look like a nice and easy mechanic, but keep in mind, at any time, this boss could just continue to be very, very dangerous.
And of course, getting some damage out from the edge, sitting in bear form to mitigate some of that brutal glaive damage for the Resto Druid on the left side for D. In the meantime, Ilisana has also been pulled by SKYLINE top on the right hand of your screen for those at home. Differential much smaller between the two. Of course, the exact same trash percentage as they pulled, well, essentially exactly the same amount of trash up until this point. Now, of course, we will see D hit the transition phase here earlier, deal with those ads earlier, but you know, it's kind of at the end of the fight that it fell apart for D last time, whereas top had a clean transition the whole way through, so we'll have to see if they kind of get greedy like they did at the end there.
It was relatively surprising though as well when that death came in. It wasn't necessarily something that we expected, but it did seem like a safe death. That's why we keep critiquing it, because this is a checkpoint, so you could just easily get back up, but now they are going to just be chunking away at Ilisana. And keep in mind, the other thing that's going to make it equal is not only the trash percentage, but we have 0 deaths for everyone here. 0-0 as far as deaths are concerned. So this is an exact race at this point. Times don't really matter. What you see on your screen is exactly where these players are.
So this Fel Rush is kind of one of the most dangerous things here. We're going to see a bit of damage going on the players. The Rogue proccing cheat death there. Luckily, it was on a player that wouldn't die from it. That's kind of what caused the problem last time. They're doing a good job here of keeping both the Arcanist and the Vanguard interrupted. Now, the Arcanist especially is most important because all those successful arcane blasts that go through will increase the damage of the subsequent ones afterwards. So it's important that they constantly interrupt it, which they're doing a very good job of.
Definitely. They're doing a fantastic job of doing just that. But also, like you mentioned, very fortunate that they actually did see this go on the Rogues, because cheat deaths were able to be procced here. Now a big Grievous stack for our healer to deal with on the side of D, but it looks like they may be able to get out of this one nice and safe. Just doing their work on Ilisana now, and this is around the time that we actually did see that death come in last time. It was because it went onto the Death Knight. Death Knight didn't have as much to work with and just brought down, or sorry, Demon Hunter.
Now, they do a really good job there with that Fel Rush, and what happens is it targets 3 players, and they kind of get in a triangle around the boss to make sure that they minimize the amount of, well, the amount of space that is taken up by that charge in the first place, and the amount of chance that they can get cleaved. Nonetheless, they get over here to the first stairwell with the boulders, Indiana Jonesing to the top of the stairs, ready to what I assume will be the same massive pull with with all of those Blade Lords as well.
I'm just going to say, this Druid's my spirit animal. Just waiting every time for the rest of the team to get past the gauntlet and just walking up the stairs without a care in the world. But now they're going for this massive pull yet again. Last time, this was actually one of the most beautiful things we saw out of them.
Well, it was a bit sloppy by the end. Remember, the healer did die. We did have perk proc on the tank, right? Those Blade Lords have to be babysat at all times. Once they start that assault cast, you have to make sure you interrupt the assault cast after the cast is done, right at the beginning of the channel, because once they get out of their CC, they'll actually just recast it. So really important. But this time, a lot more damage coming in on the trash, of course, from the players. So they're handling it quite well, but this is where things got a bit hairy last time too. They got a lot of burst in, and then everything started spreading out, and the healer kind of bit the dust, but they seem to be slowing it down. Perhaps on purpose too, just to deal with those bursting stacks a bit better.
They're decently far ahead at this point. This is where they can really kind of start to sneak ahead. Like you said, though, there were maybe some balls dropped. I still actually liked how they did the pull last time. I liked them going a lot faster there. Yes, the healer did drop, but you know, you're so close to the checkpoint, the healer can just go back into cat form or charge back in without a problem. But this time, they're able to do it quite quickly. They don't have to lose those 5 seconds by actually getting the death, and now they're already off to the races.
A lot of damage coming in. The Rogue that proc the cheat death on Ilisana actually does go down. The healer's going to have a lot of trouble breaking out of the bursting Grievous combo. They do sit down and eat, help out. The Rogue does release, of course, checkpoint at Ilisana coming back up, and they start heading up the stairs. Everything's stabilized. We do have a perk proc from the tank on the D side. Meanwhile, on the top side, on the right side of the screen, for top, that is, of course, they're doing a similar pull. They're dealing with the last of those Blade Lords in the meantime, making sure to interrupt those brutal assaults. Clean pull for them as well, and quite quickly done, might I add.
Actually, Drew gonna risk the rocks here as well. Gonna be running up before that gauntlet is complete. Kudos to you. That's not something I am brave enough to do very many times.
Don't I know it? So they're actually done. They actually finished that pull, if I were to say, top faster, finished faster than D did. They'll be heading up the stairwell now as well. And you know, with D, last time we saw they pulled, so they did this math stealth, make sure that the bats don't smack him in the meantime. They went to that kind of lobby area before heading up to the arch stairs leading up to Smash Spite, gripped the remaining 2 Dominators in, and dealt with all 6 of them here. So here was the huge grip, massive damage goes out, and as you noted last time, Rich, they grabbed some of the bats that were left over and went to Smash Spite with it for that extra rogue damage.
And keep in mind, last time, yes, it was the rogues who just shot ahead on the damage meter. They're instantly putting that damage in, but very early on, we actually did lose our resident Demon Hunter for D, and there were no battle reses available. Now they're going to have all their battle reses to work with. But the thing is I gotta commend our other team as well. Top being much more aggressive, and you can tell that it was very much a strategy that they decided to go with, but they're well rehearsed on all these strategies, and this adaptation is making them even more of a contender. No matter what happens here, they are looking very good.
And both teams doing a similar pull here. Keep in mind there's a 1 death differential which could play a huge role by the end of this dungeon. Dealing with the Dominators, pulling the bats into the room. We do see Top in a moment pulling Smash Spite as well, and Smash Spite right now being having already been pulled by D. The Rogue's healthy, you know, just a bit of Grievous there, gets out of it, no problem. Now, we didn't really get to talk too much about the mechanics last time because everything kind of went upside down. Now, there are the bats that shoot kind of those goo lines on the side, which you can direct, and it is important because we saw how badly out of hand it got last time if you don't direct those lines well. And of course that charge that ended up killing the Rogue this time was well taken by the Druid. Huge amount of damage going onto the raid there by that AoE stomp as well.
And you can see though, already they are dealing with all of these mechanics smashingly now that they are getting this additional try. You know, some weird stuff went down, and now ultimately the team's going to be back on this boss. But look on the other side of your screen. Look at that right-hand side of your screen. They're off to the races here. They're just a little bit behind, and like you mentioned, they don't have any deaths. So they are 5 seconds further, and as you can see, as these 5 seconds actually do play out, they're creeping up to the same amount of health percentage that Smash Bite does have for D.
Right, you are creeping up just like these guano waves on the side. Smash Bite just dipping below 50% HP. There are only 13% differential between the two teams, not to mention, of course, that 5-second death penalty. Big hit coming in on the right side of the screen from the AoE for Smash Bite. The Rogue's getting so low, gonna have to get out of that Grievous soon. There's the second stack stacking up very quickly, third stack in a moment. Druid desperately healing those Rogues up, making sure they go above that 90% threshold to get rid of that increasing bleed size.
And you can see very good guano placement there, and as we do see it go ahead and fall onto that pavement, I feel the bat's pain there.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they're going to want to talk about this later. Now, 44%. We are getting a further pull ahead from D right now, as is expected. We had about a 13% differential. Now we're looking at about 18% between the two. Some of that will be made up in that kind of execute range from Top on the right side of the screen. Now, Smash Bite being done, I mean, just no problem here for them. No death, no boo-boo, but they have had that one death. We keep talking about it, and we're going to keep talking about it, because if these two teams are playing the way they do all the way to the very end, it's going to come down to seconds.
But we also do have we have a death on the other side though now as well. So they are pretty. It's what you see is what you get at this point. So that 20% is really going to be the gap between these two teams. And keep in mind that these battle reses that exist they can almost be useless when we do get to this next boss. The way that the mechanics actually do work out, you get into some interesting places based on that buff.
I mean, right you are. So they're finishing out, and you know, they pulled pretty far ahead. When D killed Smash Spite, there were a 23% differential between the boss, so they just pulled further and further ahead on single target. Now, similar to what we saw Top do last time before we did have to replay this match, exactly the same pull from D as well. They pull the entire hallway, making sure that these Lancers are avoided for their jumps, everything CC'd down, and of course that coup de grace from the Swordsman. We want to make sure that doesn't land on the tank, and if it does, you're going to need some heavy CDs for that.
Yeah, and honestly, you can kind of stop the coup de grace hurrah, as you can already see, which is going on right now as they start to make this trash not their problem, move on past it, try to get to this last boss. And let's start talking about last boss. We did not make it there last time. Now we get there in this replay. What do we got to worry about, Sloot?
I mean, we did start talking a bit about it last time. So there are two phases to this boss. We have this first kind of humanoid phase with Cortalis Ravencrest, where you'll have to avoid some of these shadow lines across the middle of the room that you'll see one of the casters on the side do. He will target a player with a glaive, and that glaive will remain there for the rest of this phase. Anybody who comes in contact with it will be punted away. And of course, there will be kind of a big hit on the tank, applying a humanoid phase here, Dentalian Axe will actually come out, starting the second part of the fight. There is one very dangerous part in this fight. Once the Dentalian Axe spawns, you will eventually get a massive buff to the group, 300% increased health, damage done, and healing done. But before you get that buff, you have to go through a sequence of events, including, Rich, as you know, that AoE Shadow Bolt volley, which could be lethal for players.
Yeah, it's pretty lethal for Rich a lot of the time. We'll have to see what they actually have to deal with it. Do you think that either of these groups is better positioned to deal with that massive amount of damage that is going to be coming?
Oh yeah, I mean, D's gonna have no problem. They have double Cloak of Shadows. They have immunity from the Demon Hunter with Netherwalk. You go Bear form for the Druid, and the DK is no problem, right? They're just gonna pop AMS and Vamp.
That was also something that we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier when we saw that team that was running no healer, the team no healer. They had their Demon Hunters not having that immunity because you need that constant healing. Here, the Demon Hunter can very easily take that, and also you have Darkness, which is going to keep the entire team relatively safe during that shadow.
I mean, we just saw it right there. That AoE Shadow Bolt volley went off, and nobody except the Druid took damage. Everybody was 100% HP. Now, there is some dangerous stuff at the rest of this fight, too. Mostly it's just a grind on the boss. You have to dodge this kind of either clockwise or counterclockwise sequence of beams that go across the middle of the room. But that stinging swarm that the boss spawns hits you very, very hard. It has to be killed really quickly because it's a really heavy dot on the group. The Risen Lance, of course, now has broken loose on purpose. They're opting to kill it during this transitionary period to get that extra percent that they need on the trash. There, it does fall in the end, and now it's just a matter of who's going to kill this boss first.
And that's one of the big things to note, especially with Blood Death Knights being so prevalent. You really do expect these Blood Death Knights to be actually controlling an undead, so a lot of the times you are going to see that 99% mark, but they're able to finish that off with the trash. The release comes in, and now they've already got this boss to around that halfway mark. You can see the Stinging Swarm, something that has to be dealt with by D, and now creeping up on them is going to be their competition right now. 1-1. Completely what you see is what you get. These health bars are going to determine who takes map number 1.
Absolutely. And of course, those clouds on the side, didn't really talk about them too much, but nothing to talk about. It's really just if you want to go for a nap, you should go touch one of those clouds and inhale that smoke. I suggest you don't do it. Of course, Dentalian Axe, they will likely go through one more round of Dreadlord's Guile here in just a moment, about a 20-second intermission before they get to access to Dentalian Axe again. Well, they will be able to finish him off. At this point, the only way D is going to lose is by a wipe or some kind of death of a couple of the DPS because they're in a dominant lead.
They're in a very dominant lead, and this is one of the places, though, where they could lose it, right? You take that one misstep, maybe you accidentally do get put to sleep, and you just get blasted to oblivion by the mechanic that does come in here, but it looks like they're going to be able to navigate this without a problem. You got to make sure, this is one of the questioning areas, though, you got to make sure that you don't fall asleep there, but they are able to do it just in the nick of time, and now all they have to do is 13% more damage, and they're going to be able to serve up a dose of vitamin D to their competition and take that first map win. And Sloot, I believe it's the time of the map where we get to see the loot.
Is there any loot?
I don't think there is anymore, Rich.
I think we might have taken away the chests, but we added an extra $100,000 in exchange. So it's kind of like you win something, you lose something. But definitely SKYLINE.D with a strong performance in that game, able to win it once again. Which would you prefer, the chest? Were you saying?
Can I get that?
Maybe we can actually pay you for this chest.
Or pay him to stop saying.
Yeah, or perhaps that. I mean, that's definitely something that I saw as a theme from before. One of the things I do want to mention, guys, of course, that was a replayed map. A bug did occur. It was a known issue throughout the first one. Admins did review it. They had a little look over it. They saw, of course, that it was a bug. They felt like it wasn't intended, like it wasn't intentionally procced by the team. I mean, the Quadrant was running out of space, if you remember that one. But on the flip side, they have communicated to the teams now that this is a known issue. They've made sure that if anyone does have it going forward, like whether it's intentional or non-intentional, we will not be replaying for that one. So all the teams have had this communication. They'll have to play around that going forward. But it didn't cause SKYLINE.D to bat an eye. They still had a strong performance in that second map. And now they're going to go forward 1-0 in the series.
I also want to bring up, though, their competition top. It was very, very malleable as a team, and we actually saw them be somewhat dynamic, switch up their strategy, go for bigger pulls, and now maybe we'll even see that from them moving forward in this round. Maybe we'll see them kind of pick up the tempo a little bit because it seemed to work for them. They're a team that can definitely handle that pressure.
Yeah, I mean, they really can. They are the #1 seed coming out of China, so it's no surprise that they are the team that can do it. We are going to see, honestly, if Skyline Top can pull it back up, though. SKYLINE.D with a strong map 1, winning that 1-0. On the first time that we saw the Blackrock hold, it was a journey and a test for both the teams, I would say, but Skyline Top now are up against it. They will have the map choice, they will have the affix choice going into the second map, but they have to beat their sister team 2 times in a row if they are to reverse this and advance to tomorrow's upper bracket grand final. Join us after this to find out if they can do it. Welcome back, everyone. We are here 1-0 between the SKYLINE.D, the #1 seed coming out of China, have had a very good performance. And I mean, honestly, Skyline Top also did, but both these teams with clean runs, SKYLINE.D just had a little bit more damage. But now I want to dive straight into it because I'm so excited for the map choice coming out of Skyline Top. They have locked in Seat of Triumph, but now we've only seen that once throughout the Mythic Dungeon Invitational.
It didn't go well.
It was a wipe fest. They've thrown an explosive as well, and against the Restoration Druid, that's going to be very hard.
End of that match at the last MDI, I had 5 o'clock shadow on my head.
Oh man,
it was a long one.
Straight
it was
to
a
the
very long one. We can see the map pool here as well. I mean, we've really elevated the quality of the maps that these teams are going to have to do, right? You can see it's a slightly smaller pool. Seed of Triumphant, Cathedral, Lower Karazhan, Archway, and Halls of Valor were the choices. None of those are particularly pleasant, but on the 23, I can't believe they chose Seed of the Triumphant. These guys have absolutely had enough when it comes to that.
I mean, this to me speaks curveball to the other team and something that they've kind of well rehearsed and well practiced, especially because, I mean, it's just not a dungeon people want to do ever, right? So.
Hey, look, the first thing that I said when I heard that this was the map was I asked what the mercy rule was for this tournament. But in all seriousness, even last night, Salute, when we were kind of talking about things that we expected to see, and we were all hanging out, you know, just talking about what we expect to see with the mass, watching some streams, you know, having a good old time, pretty much the opposite of what they're going to have when they actually do get in a seat of triumvirate. But the thing is we brought this up as a map that, as a top team, you really do want to practice. This can kind of be that trump card where all of a sudden it's like, okay, it's our map pick. Let's just close this one out. You can have that practice on seat and just go and jump in there and expect that the other team maybe doesn't have as much practice. One of the things that we saw in the other tournament, it didn't make sense to really practice seat, and the reason for that was because you had to get to the place to even be going to seat. You didn't see it until that final round, and that was one of the reasons that it was such a bloodbath. It's going to be different this time around, for sure. At least we hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that you would prepare. Well, yeah, I don't know. It might be quite entertaining if they just wipe over and over, but it's definitely something where if you're preparing it, it's because you're confident, right? We only have Seed of the Triumphant in the second and third map pool because we know it's a very hard instance on live. I think a lot of people can say that they've had difficult experiences with it. I certainly have. And on the 23, of course, it's going to be very difficult, but we can dive in and look a little bit at the affixes as well. We're going to have Fortified, Quaking, and of course, that explosive that has been locked in here. Out of the two compositions, do you think this does favor Skyline top, or do you think it really is the preparation that's made them lock this in?
I mean, a bit, sure. You know, they have that kind of the Holy Paladin going on. That'll help a lot with, a bit better than the rest of Druid with those orbs, and you know, they can help get the help from the Affliction Warlock as well. But what I'm thinking, exactly, what I'm thinking about right now is that just in general, especially with the kind of pulls that we've been seeing from these teams, especially on the D side, I mean, they're used to mass pulls. And this dungeon has a lot of trash. A lot. I mean, the first pull in the dungeon is just everything on top of that first boss. And we already talked about that kind of RNG coming up from the explosives.
Yeah, and I mean, this is that starting pull, the massive pull that teams are doing, was actually what we saw half the wipes on last year when we did run to this map. You can see it though, beautiful thing, Seed of Triumphant, although not many teams do come out triumphant here, Rich.
Yeah, I might not make it out of this one with hair. That's actually what I was thinking about before this. I might be the second bald man on the desk by the time that we are done with this one, but let's just jump in and see. Ultimately, it's off to the races.
So pretty typical, like we've mentioned before, from SKYLINE.D. They like to kind of stealth in their prime position to where they're going to AoE grip pinpoint, so have all of their melee ready to just maximize damage immediately. Now, this trash is extreme. I mean, a lot of the trash.
I repressed the fact that this was explosive. Look at how many. Oh my goodness.
I know.
You got to deal with them as quick as possible, and you want to go in with these big heals or big pulls, and you can see that the cheat death instantly proc. Now the tank's going to fall down, and they need to just kind of zerg it, and ultimately they're not even going to have to wait for the tank to get up. They instantly use that battle res instead of actually having him run over from the door.
Yeah, I mean, this is pretty typical that we see, because there's just this nasty debuff Dark Withering on the tank in this first pull that just substantially increases your damage taken. Your tank with a pull like that is only going to live so long. Pretty typical pull here. Once they kill that trash that unlocks that first boss, they opt to reset the boss to give them a bit of time to deal with these goos and, you know, get their food buff back up. In the meantime, we do see a bit of kiting over on SKYLINE top side, who has now done a similar pull. They're kiting these goos because they do a really nasty dot on the tank that can only be dispelled by the healer, of course, once every 8 seconds.
Folks at home, I love all of you so very much, and I want you to do something for your safety during this matchup right now. I need you to take a nice big drink of a glass of water here. We're going to all need to be very hydrated throughout this one. It's going to be very brutal. Now, the boss is going to be pulled for SKYLINE top. They're going to get that first pull here. And what do we got to be paying attention to with this boss?
You sound out of breath already, man. We just started.
You know, instantly you're going to see.
You know, this dungeon's not so. If you complete this dungeon properly, from a time perspective, it's not really that bad. But Zural, nonetheless, will have to deal with a few things. So he will direct a cone to one of the players that you have to move out of the way of. Otherwise, you'll probably get smacked really hard. And of course, there's that Decimate on the tank that will spawn that Void Zone on the ground and also spawn a bunch of goos around the room. If any of those goos connect with the boss, it does a devastating amount of damage to the party.
This Decimate placement, though.
Yeah,
pretty rough. Decimate plays, I mean, you're already out of so much space on this map. It's quite scary here. This Fell Eruption getting a little bit scary, but finally the Warlock going to be able to switch their target there, get that down without doing big damage here. But look at the placement of the boss right now. Another Decimate's going to be happening relatively soon, and already it's all the way on the other side of the map.
Well, it won't happen just yet, remember, because we have this fixate phase now, so somebody's gone downstairs. Once you kill 10 of those adds downstairs, and just excuse me for a second, but SKYLINE.D is having some difficulty. They have a death on the board already, actually a couple of extra deaths. We've already had another cheat death proc from one of the rogues right now, so they're having a bit of trouble with their placement as well. Now, keep in mind, Rich, if the boss traverses through the Decimate poop on the ground, it does 100% increased damage for that duration. They have 2 deaths. They opt to reset the boss to have a clean pull. Of course, one of the rogues was downstairs dealing with the mechanic, which we were just about to talk about. Somebody does get sent downstairs. You have to kill 10 mobs, and at that point, the player needs to use their special action button. And once they do that, the boss gets stunned and takes 200% increased damage for about 10 to 12 seconds, which is why you saw the boss's health chunk so hard over on SKYLINE top side.
Well played by SKYLINE top, and we're starting to see why this is their dungeon. And all of a sudden, a bunch of deaths do come in from SKYLINE.D, and they have to reset. If they don't reset, they risk getting more of those -5 seconds, those +5 seconds really onto the clock. So I do like that reset coming in as we see Zerul about to fall to top.
Yeah, it's going to take a bit more. He does have a quite large health pool because of that 200% increased damage taken. Kind of a theme we'll see on the last boss as well. This time the Arms Warrior is the one that gets sent downstairs during this phase because the tank can also get sent downstairs. The boss randomly fixates players, and it's their job to kite him properly in such a way that these coalescent voids do not touch the boss. As we mentioned, otherwise they're a huge amount of damage. DK doing well to grip one of the close ones away from the boss. And of course the boss caught, as you see, he grows in size. When he does touch that void on the ground, as we mentioned earlier, does 100% increased damage. Soon enough the warrior will be communicating that they're coming upstairs, and the boss will be getting nuked for that 200% increased damage taken.
I do want to say as well, yeah, and one of the big things that you can actually do to keep track of that is home, because you may already know your screen's going to look a little bit different when you are down in there. It's going to be much more voidy and shadowy, but one of the ways that you can keep track of it at home is you can actually see that little phase icon. That's what's going to pop up on them because they are in a different phase. But so first boss is going to fall here for the team, and as you can see right now, the rogue is going to be the one down there for SKYLINE.D as they still do try to whittle away on this boss, and you can see they got a long way to go because of that reset that did come in, and now it is going to be SKYLINE top that starts to move through this next portion of the dungeon.
So there's a bit of a sequence here that you have to do in the next part of the dungeon. In order to spawn the second boss, you actually need to deal with 3 of these kind of blueberries, as we often refer to. The first one will spawn here in front of you. Now, once you engage the first one and kill it, you kind of have a timer and a gauntlet through the rest of the dungeon where you'll get 5 small void adds that will constantly bombard you every 20 to 25 seconds. The only way to stop this from happening is to aggro and start fighting the next blueberry, which will appear oftentimes to the right, and then, of course, in the far part in the ruins. Once you kill all 3 of them, we will get the second boss spawning. Of course, we'll discuss that when we get there with the 2 pets. Now, there's a lot of trash here. It's really nasty. And one of the main things we have to watch out for is there's about 5 or 6 tricksters that are stealthed in the dungeon, and they patrol around, Rich. You're no stranger to that. You know how it is. They'll pop out at the worst times on the healer when the tank's busy with something and smack them.
Yeah, they tend to pop out on me too. Those tricky little guys. That's going to kind of be a thing throughout this entire dungeon, is waiting to see when they come out, because that's going to be an unknown for you guys at home and us as well. As these guys move throughout the dungeon, they're going to really need to be thinking about these tricksters. They can be quite dangerous. You know, they pop out instantly, they're able to chunk someone down, but once they do pop out, they're pretty much a normal thing to deal with. The tank can pick up that aggro. The group can just go about DPSing them, and that's going to be it. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. Put that trickster down to sleep. But right now, the main thing that they need to be thinking about is dealing with these blueberries, and they need to move very quickly here onto that next rift.
Yeah, so once the warden dies, now you do have to kind of make sure you interrupt that Stygian blaster. It will fear a player and nuke them, and also avoid those shadow crosses. After this, they will have to head off to usually the right of the screen here. You'll see in a moment as they trail off. In the meantime, of course, SKYLINE.D finally killing that first boss, waiting for their RP with the door to open. They will as well be heading over to that first warden. And as noted earlier, SKYLINE top is moving over to that second one. You see they waste no time. They just run up the side, grab what they need to grab, and immediately aggro the next rift warden, knowing that by doing that, they will avoid that kind of gauntlet from spawning on top of them.
It's so important there, but it is also one of those places, as we mentioned, where tricksters can be quite a problem. So we're going to be watching both of these teams right now to see who is going to get the worst end end of that. But both teams most likely, though, going to have their own strategies to try to avoid these very deadly adds. But it is going to be the upper hand going the way of Skyline top. The team that was able to pick this map, they are trailing in this series. This is their chance to even things out in this best of 3.
So the Warden about 50%. The second Warden, of course, about 50% here for Skyline top. Now, after this, they'll have to travel about twice as far as they did to the second kind of rift portal here. So there's a chance that they will have an encounter with either a Trickster or the Gauntlet, or both actually, most likely. We do see some mass stealth action going on, making sure that SKYLINE.D doesn't pull any of the trash that Skyline top opted to pull to the second Warden. So playing it a bit safer, just making sure they get to that Warden right away, nothing slows them down, especially a Trickster. In the meantime, that second Warden almost going down for Skyline top, after which I presume we're going to see them mounting up right away and just gunning straight for that third one.
Salute, I got to bring up the fact, though, where SKYLINE.D, it looked like one of the biggest ball drops you could possibly have, right? They have to reset that first boss after a few deaths come in, but now all of a sudden it is starting to get much closer here.
The Warrior kind of having a little slip there. We do have a death from the Warrior. Does get back up immediately, though. And but you're right, Rich. You're right. Now, there's a difference, though. There's an 11% trash difference between the two because SKYLINE.D opted to kind of mass stealth straight to that second Warden, whereas Top decided to pull a bunch of the trash with them. There is indeed one of those Tricksters we were talking about. They decided to kill it on the side of the room there. They do have kind of a set patrol around the area. So once you deal with one, if you know where their patrols are, you kind of know what's safe and what isn't at the moment. They are dealing with some of the extra trash. Now, they're really split up here at the moment. They did get those Voidlings spawn, which is that Gauntlet that we were discussing earlier, Rich.
Yeah, it's kind of once that first Trickster comes out, that is a huge amount of information that you really do get. That is an important thing to note. So now, a little bit of information going on to Skyline top's end of the court. SKYLINE.D, though, I do want to say, I am impressed by how they have been able to catch up. It is important that you noted that they haven't pulled quite as much trash yet, but we're starting to see the makings of a potential comeback here, and if they are able to do it, they close out the series and Skyline top actually drops to the lower portion of the bracket.
So much like I alluded to, SKYLINE.D just mounted up and they're D-lining straight for that third Blueberry. In the meantime, they're going to pull it out. They want to make sure, just like that first boss, that they pull it out of the void on the ground, else he will do 100% increased damage while touching that evil stuff on the ground. Skyline top now just catching up as well. About a 10% trash differential between them. You're right, Rich. In terms of raw progression in the dungeon, D is a bit further, but they still do have that 10% trash to make up. But we do know, especially with D, they can crank that AoE damage big time, right? They pre-position well, grip everything together, and everything just melts.
Sometimes a good D can be the best offense, and we're going to have to see if they can enact that here as they slowly start to get back into this. And you kind of expect, though, really the place where I think a team that picks this map can excel is going to be the last boss. Obviously, we have a while to go before we do get there, but the timings that you actually have to get out effective DPS on that last boss going to be crucial, and you assume that Top has a game plan for that. And when you do look with YD, and you have a Warlock as well, maybe that execute that you've mentioned quite so many times could be part of that strategy. I am curious to see that.
Now, the second boss, Saprish, which we're approaching with SKYLINE.D right now, can be really good for melee, especially for cleave, but you have to play it properly. Now, there are two pets that Saprish has. He's kind of an ethereal hunter here. So what happens is you have a tanked mob in that flying mob, and then you have the cat as well. The cat will often jump to the furthest target in the area. We'll talk about that in just a second as SKYLINE.D is making sure that they clear out the area, because there is a lot of space required for the fight with Saprish. There's a lot of blinking, a lot of movement, traps go on the ground that you have to move out of, so they want to make sure they're not accidentally pulling anything they don't want to be pulling. Saprish, of course, now spawning for Skyline top as well. They're going to be pulling the same trash pack right here in a moment, and they're just pulling further and further ahead on trash, which could be a problem later. We do have the rogue go down, one of the rogues go down on SKYLINE.D right now as well.
One of the other things that I definitely want to note is how good Warlocks can really be on this fight, because they are able to dot up so many things and get that spread pressure. But look, oh my goodness, we're going to lose another DPS here for SKYLINE.D.
Yeah, I mean, they're up to 5 deaths now. It's a bit of sloppy play for them, I guess. It really shows how well Skyline top has rehearsed what they're doing here. A lot of kiting coming out from the Skyline top Blood DK in the meantime, opting not to use that battle res for the second rogue. They will get that res off right now. The rogue didn't release either. They believe that obviously it would be quicker to just finish off that trash and then get the res on the second rogue from SKYLINE.D. In the meantime, of course, we are just cleaning up the remainder of the trash for Skyline top prior to getting onto Saprish.
And that is definitely going to be a big thing to note here. And the trash still going to be that differential, too, between these two squads as we look at SKYLINE.D only going to have that 49% compared to SKYLINE topping that with 58% here. And now they're going to get another big pool underway. They're going to be using that I-beam to get out quite a bit of pressure, but it is the Warlock who's shining here with those seeds of corruption, sowing all the seeds, getting out that massive amount of damage. And Warlocks, they really do kind of shine in this dungeon in quite a lot of different scenarios.
I mean, they do. There's a reason why they're used on live quite a lot. We do see the Rogue dip quite low on SKYLINE.D. No problem, though. Heals it back up in a moment. They will be finishing that trash soon. There's a ton of damage going on with the bleeds from all the cats as well on SKYLINE.D side. In just a moment, SKYLINE top will be finishing their trash. A bit more of a modest pull on their end, but they have completed much more trash percentage than SKYLINE.D has in a moment. Of course, we see Saprish looming ever so evilly in the background of SKYLINE.D in just a moment. I do suspect that they'll be pulling it quickly after this trash. And as we see, indeed, SKYLINE top is rearing to pull Saprish right now.
I mean, that doggy and birdie don't look that scary. I don't think it's that evil looking. Just a few pets wanting to hang out here. Now they're going to jump on into the action, and this is what we were starting to talk about, though. Look at the cleave damage that's going to be able to come out here from every single member of their team. The second boss looking very strong for them. Now, obviously, we are going to see that boss pulled as well. We already noted they're trailing by about 10% in trash, and also they are trailing in the deaths department by, so that's an extra 10 seconds that is going to be on the clock for SKYLINE.D, but let's see if they can catch up on this boss.
Now, it is important to note that you want to help your melee out with cleave here, and that cat will be feline around all over the place, but it picks the furthest target to jump to. So when it does that, if the Warlock is out by themselves, the melee are going to have to run, and the tank are going to have to run really far just to connect all three mobs together again and cleave them down. So the Warlock's doing well to kind of hug near the melee and not being too dangerous of a position, not too far away. Of course, we will see the Skywing kind of fly off by themselves. They do need a periodic interrupt on their fear, else everyone's get feared for about 5 seconds. And Rich, this was the kind of area denial that I was talking about and why you require a lot of space on this boss. Constantly, these traps are dropped on the ground. You need to move out of them very quickly as they arm very quickly.
Yeah, exactly. And you do want to stay stacked as well. That's important to note because then you're fully able to attack this kitten without pause.
Right you are, right you are. Now, sometimes the boss will actually empower these traps on the ground and they will explode for an area larger than their reticles on the ground right now, which is why they're moving well away from them in the first place so they're not displaced later on. Saprish will also kind of do a dark charge on players as you can see the arrows above their head. Not too dissimilar from the Fell Rush in Illusana that we talked about in BRH. The more targets that he hits, the more stacks he gets and the more damage he will do on the tank as a result. So players want to make sure to spread out well for that.
They definitely do indeed, but we can see it is somewhat of a race here. They're getting very close, SKYLINE.D on the boss meter, but still, it is SKYLINE top that are looking superior so far in this dungeon, and that you can see the rest of the group kind of collapsing in on each other, trying to keep everything stacked up as they get this cleave pressure out, as they deal damage on this shared health pool of this boss along with his pets. They're still up by about 10% here. And now they're trying to close it out. Everyone looking relatively healthy as well.
Both teams doing a really good job of containing the cat right now. They're making sure that it's not getting too far from the group so they get maximum uptime from the melee, the Demon Hunter, the Warrior, of course, the two rogue, well, all of the melee, of course, over on SKYLINE.D. SKYLINE.D having a bit of an easier time. It's just really the Resonator that has to make sure that they're not too far. In the meantime, Saprish will be going down first for SKYLINE top. No surprise here, they've had a bit of a cleaner run, did pull that boss first, and they're substantially ahead on trash. Now that the boss is done, we have two options of how we're going to get over to the third boss trash. One is to kind of cross this little river and perfectly split the trash coming up. Oftentimes teams won't pull this, they'll just, and it looks like that's what they're going to do. They're just going to pull about 4 or 5 goos, clear the path through the middle, and then go up the middle. Now, of course, it's much easier for SKYLINE.D to kind of go where they want. They have double stealth. But there is a kind of path around the side through that void goop on the ground where you'll meet a trickster as well.
You know, I really thought when we saw this dungeon get locked in by SKYLINE.D, the first thing I said when SKYLINE top locked it in was, gotta be kidding me. But on Dark Fang, they were able to just show us why they really did select this map as their second map here.
Absolutely. So you do see that immediately they run over to the side, and they do really well to pull the trash on top of that ledge there, because I believe it does not get buffed there from the void, making sure that they kite it along that ledge so that they don't get that increased 100% damage. Well done by them. Now, there's some really dangerous trash here. This pack coming up that you see, those Void Tendrils don't have a lot of health, but they do a ton of damage to players, so you want to make sure that they're immobile as well. You can't AoE grip them, but you can stun them, you can interrupt them, so you see that they're the first to go immediately. You want to make sure that they're not getting that Dark Flay on players, well to use their Arcane Torrents from all the Blood Elves there as well.
And the main thing that we definitely need to talk about here, one of my favorite topics, the tentacles. They are going to be quite cruel as we get on down there. You want to try to be avoiding that fillet as much as possible. And also, there's a lot of sucking in and also anti-sucking going on in this next room.
Yes, there's a lot of pulling and blowing indeed, Rich. Now, they'll be killing this. Now, it's off screen right now, but there's a really dangerous patrol here with kind of one of those mini-boss style mobs. Ton of health. Summons essentially a Void Star that needs to be killed, otherwise it will draw in players and nuke them for a ton of damage. We'll be seeing it round around the corner. It does pad in a clockwise fashion around the edge here. They're rearing up to pull in a moment, and as you can see, SKYLINE.D is actually clearing in the opposite direction, kind of trailing that patrol that we see on the far side of the screen at the bottom. They're waiting for that Shadow Weaver to pull in just a moment. Now, this is the pack that we're talking about, so there's going to be a lot of quick target swapping required here to make sure that they kill what needs to be killed immediately before their group gets nuked.
I want to talk about it a little bit here because, you know, this isn't a dungeon that we really do expect to see that often. Maybe we'll see it a little bit more as we do move into these later rounds of the tournament. But there are a few different pathing options that you really can take here as well, Slim.
Yeah, there's a ton. Well, I mean, we did talk about that earlier. At this point, there's nothing else they can do. But you're right. There's a ton of trash that's optional in this dungeon, so a lot of different stats to pull. Now, what we've seen these two teams do is pretty typical to what most people do in Seat at the moment. They would do well to kill that Dark Matter zone from the Shadow Weaver that we were alluding to earlier. That does a ton of damage. If it manages to get a cast off, once more pops up there, they kill it immediately. This Shadow Weaver is a really, really nasty mob. Luckily, we're dealing with a tyrannical setting, if I'm not mistaken. Double check on that. So it's not too, like, it's actually fortified. No, my mistake. So it is actually very dangerous. So they do very well to kill it. So in a moment, they'll be wrapping up the trash. There is one more tentacle pack for SKYLINE top on the far side of where they are across the boss. And this is the kind of boss that you can't just pull it alone because it will pull all of the trash in the vicinity. So you want to make sure you get rid of that before the boss aggroes.
Yeah, definitely a very important thing to note. And as you can see, we're kind of at like the same exact place that we were at when they actually did go ahead and pull that second boss. There's been this 10% trash gap for so much time.
Yeah, and do you see over on SKYLINE.D's side right now, the Druid kind of running out. There's a spell that's cast on the players that will kind of suck in, as you alluded to earlier, suck in and draw in all the players nearby for pulsing damage and eventually explode for a large amount of damage. You can outrange it, which is why the Druid kind of got out of the group as quickly as they could. We do see the last of the trash being cleaned up on both sides in just a moment. It looks like SKYLINE.D's kind of rearing up. Oh no, they're just now pulling the Shadow Weaver, so they're finishing the rest of the trash. This is the last pull they'll need to do prior to aggroing the third boss.
The question is, when is one of these teams going to really pull ahead, or what is going to happen? Because it's been about this 10% gap, as I already noted, and it's been about the same death differential, this 2 death differential. The big test is here as 2 cheap deaths just going to get procced by these rogues right before they get to a very dangerous boss as well.
Yeah, that was a huge hit. Not well done there to kill what was needed to be killed, obviously, with the target. Ton of AoE damage going in on the group SKYLINE.D. Both groups right now are on the last trash pack prior to the third boss. Of course, SKYLINE.D dealing with the nastier of the two with that Shadow Weaver, which you've already seen the dealing with from top. The Rogue's really chunking pretty hard here, luckily managing to stabilize a bit. One of them going quite low. He doesn't have that cheat death available. Finally gets a healing on him. We do have that Purg still procced on the Blood DK, struggling at about 50% HP there. Now they do finally pull Nazar, the third boss of the dungeon.
And this boss, funnily enough, is going to really mirror a lot of the mechanics that we just saw from the trash in this room. So this team already able to deal with quite a few of these mechanics, but one of the big things that we want to know, and this is actually a pretty rough one to deal with, and that is going to be how these tentacles really do spawn, because you want to quickly be able to get to them. You want to make sure that they're not getting off too much damage here, because they can get a massive amount of damage, and that big spread really caused them to kind of fan out and try to get that damage done quickly before those tentacles battered them down.
And you know what? This is where SKYLINE top has a really nice advantage, because the Warlock can multi-dot all of those tentacles depending where they spawn. You even saw the Havoc Demon Hunter fell rushing between the tentacles there, making sure they're all killed and interrupted right away. I mean, they're just extremely dangerous. Now, there's a bit of RNG in where these tentacles spawn. As you said, this is a pretty good spawn right here. And once the boss reaches 100 energy, which we just saw here, he will spawn 2 ethereal adds. Once you kill the 2 adds, this invulnerability shield goes away, and you need to interrupt that Eternal Twilight. Otherwise, the entire group dies. They do well to do it there, no problem. They are grippable, which is an advantage for both teams right here. You can grip one of the ethereals on top of the other one, cleave them down together, no problem. And of course, notably, we do have to also interrupt the Howling Dark, which casts about every 15 to 20 seconds on the boss. If you miss it, then, well, everyone gets feared for a few seconds. And the only way this boss moves, he does not melee, he only casts these dark bolts the whole time. The only way to move him is to interrupt that dark blast or bolt. And then drag him over to the tentacles, which you're gonna see SKYLINE.D doing a lot.
Also, I want to just note one of the other things that we're going to see is insane amounts of damage come out on Nazar on the side of SKYLINE.D. We can actually see they're just out damaging all around by a relatively impressive margin. And once again, this can be largely equated to what the rogues are able to do here. Obviously, they're going to be squishy targets because their cheat deaths are gone, but they are going to be able to run that double sud. They're going to be able to get out those glaive storms. They're doing a massive amount of damage, but it is also the Demon Hunter who's really picking up the slack.
But SKYLINE.D just getting the dream procs on those tentacles. I mean, spawning in a perfect little triangle where they could just pull the boss between all three, get that Shuriken Storm damage, cleave them all down together, get Blood Elf interrupts on them. I mean, just lucky stuff for SKYLINE.D. Really playing in the favor of their comp right now. There's some more that spawn on the side. Once again, at least 2 of them are together. I'm not sure where the third one is. It's off screen to the right, but at least 2 of them spawn together. That's quite lucky. The last ability, which we have to talk about this boss, nothing too huge.
Look at this again.
I mean,
that is kind of the thing. And now, okay, so there was one tentacle that is going to be a little bit off screen, but ultimately, they kind of need it to be able to get out this damage. That's the other thing to note, because that Shuriken Storm method of getting out those massive combo points, you can't do it if you can't reach them. And now they're going to kind of send people on over to try to deal with that tentacle, but they've already done quite a bit of work onto this boss, looking very impressive here. But it has been SKYLINE.D that's able to get out massive amounts of damage towards the end here. The Warlock really picking up.
Oh no, we have double death coming in from SKYLINE.D right now. Both the healer and one of the rogues fall. Immediate battle resist for both of them. That's another 10 seconds on the clock. A bit scattered for them right now. Boss only at 9% HP. The energy might reach another 100, so they will have to deal with another round of ethereals if that's the case. In the meantime, though, I mean, Nazar, you know, they pulled pretty far ahead, regardless of those deaths, well ahead of SKYLINE top, who's only now catching up with Nazar. They should be able to finish him off before the next energy wave. Now, Rich, one thing we failed to talk about, I mean, we've talked about before, but we need to remind everybody, is that there's a 9% trash differential between these two teams right now. SKYLINE.D is going to have to make that trash up elsewhere, and very quickly, because as soon as SKYLINE top is done with the boss, they're going to pull whatever bit of trash they need and then head off to the last 2 wardens in the boss's last room.
And obviously, there is going to be that 20-second difference inherently, right? SKYLINE.D, those 2 deaths are going to matter. They hung out at 5 deaths for quite some time. Now, an additional 10 seconds going to be added to the clock here. And we assume that SKYLINE top is better equipped to deal with this last boss. They should be able to really exploit those damage windows very well that they're going to have to deal with on this final boss. And now, just 6% trash going to be remaining for this squad. SKYLINE.D going to need another very big pull to get back into this.
Yeah, see, both teams intelligently kind of do some of the trash while the RP to open the door to this last hallway occurs. We see the last boss in the background there for SKYLINE top. Of course, they deal with his last 2 Rift Wardens, similar to the Rift Wardens we saw earlier with leading up to Sapphish, the second boss. You want to make sure that they're both interrupted. You want to make sure that you're picking up little mobs on the side, and of course, avoiding those shadow crashes on the side. In the meantime, of course, on the right, we see SKYLINE.D having to make up a bunch of that trash that they were behind, dealing with the side of the temple right there. Pretty atypical. I'm not really sure why they didn't pull some of that trash earlier. Nonetheless, they are catching up on that percentage. Once these 2 Rift Wardens are done, doing well to interrupt the Stygian Blast there, of course, both teams likely letting their Havoc interrupt, you know, for that extra
100%,
for that extra increase in resource, for the increased damage. SKYLINE top will soon be pulling the last boss, L'Ura.
Beautifully pronunciated by you there, Sloopbag. But the question is, with this boss, I've already kind of alluded to it quite a few times. The damage windows are going to be very important when the boss is actually vulnerable.
You mean allure it to it? Anyways, so we're about to pull the last boss here. Now, yes,
too much.
As you were saying,
That was too much.
There's a couple of things that we have to talk about for this boss. It's kind of a weird boss. So as soon as you pull the boss, it's going to come immune in about 2 seconds. It's going to cast an invulnerability sheet upon itself. After that, you will get a rift gate that spawns on the left side of the room, spawning one of the Arcane Wardens with a couple of extra abilities. One of them will be essentially what is a Void version of Armageddon from Kill Jaden, which we all know and love, of course. If nobody soaks it, nukes the entire raid. People within it will take a bunch of damage. Somebody does have to soak it. And then after you kill that, the boss would enter a 10-second vulnerability phase where they take 200% increased damage. Get through that, 2 Wardens spawn, kill those, another 10%, and then it's just a race against the clock.
The screech of a angel coming through right now from the boss, L'Ura.
You're right there, Rich.
I'm not.
All right, so this Greater Rift Warden being pounded on in the meantime, of course, spawning those little adds, the little waning voids. When those die, they do drop a small amount of void on the ground, and which you want to, of course, move the mobs out of. This will come into play in phase 2 once the boss becomes active and you're done with, we do have an explosive go off there. Luckily, no fatalities. Cleaning up these last 3 little voids, excuse me. The boss will become vulnerable in just a moment for 10 seconds, taking 200% increased damage. You want to get as much burst as possible. Typically, teams here will Bloodlust to get as much damage as possible and then carry this Bloodlust over into the next Greater Warden phase where there's going to be 2 Wardens, and you want to kill one of those as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Hey, that is the thing there. You can basically deal with those Wardens, as you can see right now at the end there. They're like, we don't have Hellstones. Quickly drop the Hellstones. They get that damage window in. The Warlock's able to do that damage, and then right when the Wardens come up, they're going to have the Hellstones to deal with. They're going to have those in case they do get clipped by these Shadow Crashes. It can be very important defensive cooldown for them to have, and they're going to carry that heroism into these 2 Wardens right now. You got to pluck the blueberries as quickly as possible, and you can see Blue just going to fall down. That's the healer. Battle Res instantly going to have to come out there, and Blue not out of this one yet. All black and blue for now.
Yeah, and of course those Fragments of Despair coming out, those meteors that we were talking about, you gotta soak those. Nobody soaks them. It's gonna be a huge hit on the party.
Oh my goodness!
Going off, and this is just going down the drain. We're gonna have a full wipe from SKYLINE top, just choked at the finish line. In the meantime, SKYLINE.D, of course, prepping to pull Lura themselves. That could
just be it.
I mean, that's big. They have to run. There's a fair bit of run back right now, and this is a long boss fight. I mean, it could have been worse if they wiped phase 2, but all eyes on SKYLINE.D. It's theirs to lose at the moment. So once again, we see that similar pull dealing with this first Greater Rift Warden.
And now, luckily for us, we get to hear Laura cry out in the night once again, and we know that that's enough to get anyone to convert over to the Void. Laura definitely making her purpose known here, but now the only thing that SKYLINE.D needs to do is play this clean. They don't necessarily need to go really fast. Everything that they were up against before, the fact that they have 8 deaths, it doesn't matter, because now it's going to be 9 deaths on the side of SKYLINE top. They're evened up in trash. Now it is going to be SKYLINE.D that really does have the upper hand here.
It is indeed. I mean, SKYLINE top got back pretty quickly, but it's pretty make or break here. SKYLINE.D's, if they kill this properly, if they execute this boss properly, it's theirs to take. They've shown time and time again throughout this dungeon that they just have more or less the superior single target damage compared to SKYLINE top.
I will note, though, and we kept kind of alluding to this.
Alert.
Oh, man. The only thing that can drive me to the Void quicker than Laura is you, Ted, my good friend. But the thing is, SKYLINE top, this was their map pick. And this is a boss that you have to be keeping in mind here. The Warlock and the Warrior may be enough for them to really kind of light this one up, to really put the gas pedal down.
You're right. It is a very long execute phase because of the health pool of this boss, because you have that dual 10-second, 200% damage increase taken phases. One of the Greater Rift Wardens finally does go down for SKYLINE.D's second rotation. They're going to work on the second one right now, make sure that they're placing this kind of void from the voids on the side of the room, after which they will
void the void.
Void the void. After which, of course, they will prepare to nuke the boss for another 10 seconds, 200% damage taken. And at that point, the name of the game is bouncing from either side of the stage once the boss picks up the void on the floor and places it on top of the players' heads.
This one, I mean, for quite some time, kept emphasizing the fact that SKYLINE.D was really on the back foot, right? They had 10% less in trash for about as long as we can remember, and they were 2 deaths behind. Then they pick up a couple more deaths as well, and then you go, oh my goodness, this could be it for them. This could be their ticket straight to the lower bracket. The #1 seeded team in this China region, and now they have found a windfall. SKYLINE top has toppled to Laura once. Now they're back on it, but Laura quickly getting chunked by this team. SKYLINE.D trying to get the hot 2-0.
Bit of a miscommunication. The rogue one of the rogues goes in the opposite direction there, loses a bit of uptime on the boss. Now, note that the boss was at 43% for SKYLINE.D when they finished their second burst phase. Lura for SKYLINE top, especially because they lost their lust, is at 74%. I mean, that's a ridiculous amount of boss health that they have to chew through because they've gone through both of the burn stages. I mean, at this point, SKYLINE.D is gonna likely take the cake, Rich.
Lust, such a huge factor there, too. That really is kind of a big one to be talking about. Quite a doozy to not have that, and now Laura already at 22%. This is the execute range that we said could be really important for this other team, but SKYLINE.D may be able to just shut this one out before SKYLINE Top ever gets to see that moment. Because keep in mind, SKYLINE Top's a little bit further behind as well. They now are the ones with the greater amount of deaths. They are 10 seconds behind, and Laura just needs to be sneezed on at this point. We talked about how big that health pool really is from Laura, but SKYLINE.D whittling away at that without a problem.
Yeah, I mean, the health bar really is deceiving here. All you're seeing is a percentage, but this boss has somewhere in the range of 1.8 billion HP just because of that increased damage taken stage. And SKYLINE.D indeed is actually going to 2-0 the series.
Oh my goodness, I almost fell through the screen there. So exciting to actually see how SKYLINE.D was able to... This is a pretty decent time coming out from this squad as well. Looking good here on a dungeon that was probably the bloodiest dungeon that we ever have seen in the history of the Mythic Dungeon Invitational.
You know what? I think going into this dungeon, like one of the things that I did like before I came out here for the Mythic Dungeon Invitational was I unlocked my allied races, and I mean, check it out on retail. They're super cool if you haven't done them already, but I unlocked a Lightforged Draenei. After watching what Laura did to that team's hope and dreams there, I'm never going to play my Lightforged Draenei. I'm going to go full Void, full Shadow Priest for the rest of my times. Maybe some Void Elf somewhere in there as well. But
I thought we weren't going to
congratulations.
RP anymore.
You always RP, just a little bit. It's an RP game at the end, Rich.
It's good to avoid it.
But anyway, SKYLINE.D with an impressive display. I was really happy to see SKYLINE Top there. They came out with their pocket pick. It was something we've seen as a theme throughout these guys where they have this kind of like reserve pick should they lose a map, but just a little bit unfortunate at the end. They were doing very, very well, but SKYLINE.D coming out the #1 seed from China, they were able to keep their composure and take the map 2-0, and now they're through to tomorrow's grand final.
And that wipe too is really going to, it's going to just completely void that map pick advantage there.
Yep, it is. That is very true, Rich. Thank you very much for raising that point. I'm sure everyone is better off for having seen that. Yeah, no, it was good. It was good. But anyways, we have our top grand finalists now. We won't see them till tomorrow. They're one series away from getting to that top 2, which you do need, of course, to qualify to here to see Rich's face and hear some of his horrible puns, Sluto. Definitely.
You could touch me. You could actually shake my hand if you make it.
I always don't want to make puns, Josh.
Is that enough incentive to go ahead and win the Mythic Dungeon Invitational?
It doesn't get better than that, right? But now we're going to be hopping over to the other side of the upper bracket, of course, and we've got No Healer, which is one of my favorite rosters. I think I've been trumping their horn just a little bit. I'm sure Jack hasn't been quite so happy with them, but they provided us some great entertainment, and they're going to be going up against the other Sun Sky teams. So we've seen a bunch of the Skies so far, but I was just very happy to see how both the teams handled that dungeon. It was a lot better than last year.
I mean, that was a really exciting series. It was close on, well, essentially what was 3 maps, but just both maps. I mean, all it took was just that one slip from top at the end because they had it in the bag, you know, other than that. And that's all it took. It just shows how close they were. That was their comfort pick, and SKYLINE.D was just on their trail the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, if that wipe didn't come in, it very easily could have seen that go to a game number 3. SKYLINE Top throughout pretty much the entirety of that dungeon really were showing why they picked it, why that was their map pick. It's just unfortunate, and that really does go to show in Mythic Dungeon Invitationals at any point, even if it looks like it can be close, there's always that little bit of hope that that team can pull out. Anything can really happen until it's said and done.
Yep, well, the Battle of the Skylines has been concluded. We do have SKYLINE.D coming out on top. Unfortunately for SKYLINE Top, they did get kind of clotheslines, honestly, by Laura.